watching our webinars from all sorts of different places, which we always love. My name is Marcus Harvey. Today I'm going to be talking to you about cybersecurity for non-profit IT managers, together with Anne, who's helping me look after everyone. As you join, you will be automatically muted, but don't hesitate to interact with us and ask questions at appropriate times throughout, as we are really keen to make sure we give you the greatest possible value from today's session. We've got a couple more coming, and so I will start with the agenda in a second. All right. I would like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. Both Anne and I really pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and especially extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on this webinar today. We're joining today from Bunurong and Wurundjeri country in the Kulin Nation, and it's really good to see a lot of those conversations around sovereignty and treaties progressing much further than they have in the past. So it's really nice to see some of those things which have, as a nation we've struggled with, starting to proceed in some positive directions. Today, we're going to talk about cybersecurity, and this is very, very relevant to everyone in the non-profit landscape. We want to just explain the landscape as we see it, as well as talk about what are some of the cybersecurity practices organisations should have in place, some key entry points that we think people really need to keep front of mind and think about: how am I protecting my staff and my organisation and my data from these entry points? Because the issue is getting more and more risky, and there are more challenges in this space, and particularly in the non-profit sector, because it's always hard to balance everything that should be done with everything that can be done. I want to talk a bit about phishing, because we're still seeing that as a significant risk to organisations, and that is the most common thing organisations will come to us about, in terms of they have been phished and there has been issues within their organisation. Give you some broad stats around cybersecurity in the non-profit sector. If you haven't seen it, our non-profit or digital technology in the not-for-profit sector report is out, so I'll share you some of those stats in about halfway through the webinar. Key takeaways, useful resources, and as always, time for questions and discussion, because we are keen to make sure that this webinar gives you as much information as you need to protect the information within your organisation. A little bit of housekeeping. What we're really keen to do is give you the best possible experience. So please, if you can, keep your video on. Lovely to see a few faces on the call. We'll mute you as you joined, but please stay on mute unless you need to ask questions. Raise your hand. Either virtually is better than physically, depending, because we do have quite a good number of people on the call today. But there is also times for Q&A at the end. If we don't get to everyone, Anne and I will be on the call later to talk through. We're also available through the Digital Transformation Hub website if you have cybersecurity questions. The webinar is being recorded, and you will be sent a copy within 2 days, together with the presentation pack, so that you have all these resources available to you. You don't need to take spurious notes. You can listen and think and apply it to your organisation. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone. I'm running out of space on this slide, I've got to say. This is a bit frustrating in terms of cybersecurity and the headlines. I was caught up in the Optus breach. Thankfully, I wasn't caught up in the Medibank breach, but a few of my staff were. And so, yeah, and you can see there's a bunch of nonprofits that have also had challenges. Oxfam, I think that was Uniting Care Queensland. There was a large Melbourne-based nonprofit mentioned in the bottom right there. There's some real challenges in the cybersecurity space, and this is only going to get a bigger issue. So from our perspective, it's always far easier to get the right cybersecurity protections in place beforehand. The effort afterwards, after there is a breach or after there is an issue, is 2, 3, 5 times fold more difficult and takes that much more time, because you've got to do the investigation. You've got to work out what they've actually accessed. You've got to deal with reporting and disclosure as appropriate to whoever was impacted. It's interesting to note there's legislation now before Parliament that will lift the maximum fine for serious or repeated breaches from 2.2 up to $50 million, not 550. So that's just sort of government saying, organisations, and I think after the last couple, actually there was another one, there was a school in Melbourne today or yesterday that was in the papers as well, where student data has been hacked. It's probably going to be made available publicly as well. And the challenges from our perspective is that, non-profits really do keep a lot of sensitive data. And when you look at the ACSC stats, so I'm just going to touch on a few of these, increase of average of $64,000 per report. So that is significant. 14% rise in the average cost of cybercrime over the last 12 months. 25, this is the one that's really annoying for me as an IT professional, 25% increase in the number of vulnerabilities that are being reported. So, I can give you the positive spin. Maybe we're being more upfront about the vulnerabilities that exist within IT systems, but the negative spin is we haven't got things under control yet. And so what we're seeing is an awful lot of challenge in this space. We're now talking to a lot of organisations that have said cybersecurity is hard. We've just been trying to do without dealing with it for a bit because we've had too many other things on our plate. Now we've actually got to start to deal with it. So how do we sort the wheat from the chaff? How do we focus on what's important and what's going to give us the most impact? Because many people in the nonprofit space are not cybersecurity experts, and getting that understanding is really important to make sure you get the basics in place. These stats were published earlier this month, so they're hot off the press, and they're from the ACSC's annual cyber threat report. If you need to know more about cybersecurity and you haven't checked out the ACSC website, it is one of the best resources of cybersecurity stats in terms of convincing your board and management team that you need to take it seriously if that's what you need to do. The challenge from our perspective is that we non-profits, Info Exchange is a non-profit as well, often hold highly sensitive data. And for many of the organisations that we work with, staff can be more comfortable working with people than working with technology. And that's often on purpose because, helping change lives is always requires special skills. But making sure that people have those fundamentals in place with technology is also really important. Our biggest frustration is that the human element is continuing. This is not just a non-profit challenge. This is a organization-wide challenge or sector-wide challenge. A recent global breach report by Verizon found 82% of breaches involved that human element. So if you have the best cybersecurity technological defenses in the world, you haven't tackled that human side. And that's one of the things we really try to emphasize. We've got to tackle both. We've got to tackle, we've got to support, educate, and culturally help people think about cybersecurity as well as get the protections in place. It's not enough just to have one or the other. Good system, device, and data security practices are required in addition to consciously thinking through and educating that human side. And we'll cover that more in a bit. From our perspective, you really need protection at a few different layers because more and more organizations are moving into the cloud. I think the latest stats for the sector, Australia and New Zealand, was that 82%, that's off my head, so I might have it slightly wrong, of organizations now have their systems largely in the cloud or planning to move them largely to the cloud. So significant number. And that's despite some challenges with internet connectivity in many rural places all around Australia still. So getting a network, computing devices, your applications, and your data, they're all things that need to be thought through from a cybersecurity perspective to make sure you've got those core elements under control. I'm just going to jump to a poll question and we'll throw that up, as to whether or not you'd provide documented guidance for staff as to where to save their information. Do you provide documented guidance for staff as to where to save information? If you don't provide guidance to staff, staff may save it in all sorts of strange and interesting places, including on their home PCs that their kids use. So that was what we're interested in. To what extent as an organisation do you provide that information to your staff? And this is all about managing that human element. Ooh, we're doing pretty well here. The results that are coming through, and we'll see them continuing to change. 60% do provide documented guidance for staff. Oh, that's dropping. That's sort of, I was going to say it's probably only 50% in my experience with the organisations I've worked with. So we're at 54% are giving us a yes, so that's pretty good. About 25% no, 20% not sure. And if we're not, so the reason why this is important is we advocate for organisations to think about the information they store and making sure sensitive information is stored in more secure areas. So for instance, information about clients or members should be stored in a client case management system, CRM membership management system with particular protections against them. What we find and information in email, especially that's shared with other organisations, is often not as safe. So helping staff think about and getting their head around what's more important and what's less important and where do those things need to be saved is really important to make sure that you are looking after that. The other thing around making sure that organisations think about where to save data is that only certain areas are usually backed up. So if you're not giving staff that guidance, there's often, many places associated with a PC and file storage areas that may not be backed up and may not be encrypted to provide that reasonable level of guidance. And so helping staff think that through is really important to making sure that if something goes wrong, that data is not going to be lost. And if something goes wrong or the device gets lost, it's not easily accessible. That then leads to that data breach. Also, it's important to think about how to handle physical documents. So shredding prior to disposal, don't leave documents with personal information on desks or in public areas. While we're talking about cybersecurity, physical security of physical documents is also really important. All right, next question, just to get a little bit of insight into where people are at. Is multi-factor authentication enabled for all your internet facing systems with sensitive data. Options up there, yes, no, not sure, and of course, but only when the data is being stored in a risky country. I'll leave you to determine what countries are risky and what are not, but interested in where people are at in terms of multi-factor authentication. So we're getting it's pretty good results. So this is very positive. About 2/3 are reporting, yes, MFA is enabled for all internet-facing systems with sensitive data. From our perspective, that will include your email system. So whether that be Microsoft 365, whether that be Google Workspace, or some other email system, often which includes files and collaboration features. I've just picked those two because they provide great non-profit discounts and options. 24%, so 1 in 4 is saying no, not enabling multi-factor authentication. This is really important to us because getting that multi-factor authentication in place is one of the easiest and the most valuable actions in terms of making sure that you're protecting that data and taking reasonable steps to make sure that you're doing the right thing. You know, so from our perspective, that covers both your email, cloud collaboration environment. It also will considers where you store your client data, health records, all those sorts of things as well. Most organizations won't be storing credit card data, but if you are an organization that's capturing and have taken the decision to store that, I would advocate you make sure that you are fully compliant with the appropriate laws around that, because they are pretty stringent these days. Good to see no one picked our attempt at humour. I didn't get a lot of smiles from those that have their videos on about the yes when data is being stored in a risky country. Keeping on going, this is an interesting one. So how many different systems are used across your organisation is the next one. And the reason we're asking this is because the more systems there are in an organisation, the more systems need to be protected. And we work with a lot of non-profits that have challenges keeping supporting their staff to use appropriate systems with good technology protections. And so that was where the no idea people and teams start using new systems by themselves is often a challenge that we find. So the results coming in, about 1/3 saying 3 or less, the lucky ones, although the number's dropping. About 20%, 25% saying 4 to 8, about another quarter saying 9 to 12, and then a smaller number saying more than 13 and more than no idea, or as well as some other as well. The reason that this is critical is if you've got lots of systems, that requires you to think about how are we protecting the information in all those systems? Where is the data being stored? Do we need multi-factor around it? Is there appropriate controls around both enabling and disabling users? One of the stories that we had on the headlines in the slide 3, that breach was because someone hadn't been disabled when they left the organization. And so making sure those controls are appropriate and the procedures disable access when people change roles or leave an organization is really critical. And that becomes more and more difficult the more systems are within an organization. Our approach is always less systems is better, so long as the systems do do their job properly, only because it makes it a whole lot better to ensure that you're keeping the information safe within those systems. When you're thinking about systems, it's really important to think about user access security. So length and composition of passwords or passphrases, making sure that users know how to pick a good password is important. We've talked already about multi-factor authentication. Uh, not reusing passwords across user accounts, changing passwords if they've been compromised, and not sharing passwords with other staff. If that's not possible, because we know that there's always some challenges in that space, making sure that you do that in a secure way and passwords are changed when someone leaves is really important. We recommend using a password manager if you do have shared accounts, just to manage that process more effectively. One of the things that I will often do to educate staff as to why it's important not reusing passwords across different accounts is, if you haven't seen it, and this will be in the links, I use the Have I Been Pawned website. So this is a great website. If you're not aware of it, jump on, put your email in or your phone number, see what you can get out of it. And you can see whether or not there's been a breach involving your details. So for instance, I've put in my personal email address into this site. So not my work one, my work's not quite so exciting, but I am generally security conscious. And you can see these are the breaches my personal email address has been involved with, right? Dropbox, my password got out. Epic, I don't even remember what that is, a whole stack of details, purchases, email address, phone numbers. Facebook, relationship details have got out. Flexbooker, again, passwords have got out. House, again, passwords have got out. So if I used the same password in one of these websites, as well as in my business accounts, client and case management, Office 365, hackers would have both my email address and my password. If I didn't have multi-factor authentication, they would get in. So this is the reason I use this site and my email address specifically, because you can see how many password compromises there were, and the fact that I'm actually pretty careful. It's a good explanation as to why staff really need to use different passwords for different sites. Hopefully that will help you create the desire for staff to use good password practices. Question again, do you provide staff with guidance on whether or not they can work using their own devices? So that might be their own mobile phone, that might be their own computer. Just interested because there's pros and cons to this on both sides. So little question again, do you provide staff with guidance as to whether or not they can work using their own devices? And I'll put that up in a second. Thanks, Anne. And the challenge for devices is the more that they use their own devices, the more you need to think about what controls there are around them. And so a lot of organizations will let, as actually, and it's the polls are actually coming up with what I was about to say, they've got to use our PC, but can use their own mobile phone. So that's actually, in my experience, the most common option. But the more you can use your own device, the more you need to think about, is there sensitive data that may be stored on that device? So for instance, if it's on a PC, could they store sensitive data on their PC? If it gets lost, what protections are around there? So this is really important to think about, mainly because helping staff think through, if you're using your own device, could there be sensitive information on the email in the phone? Could they be saving a sensitive document, a client letter on their own PC in their own home? How open is that to compromise? Does it have antivirus? Is it being patched from a Windows perspective? And they're the things that we always like to say are really important to think through. All right. 22% must use our PC and mobile phone. So that's slightly higher than what we've done in the past. So it's interesting to see as people, and if the more we require them to use our devices, the more that is easier to control from a security perspective, but also there's a cost impact of that as well. So getting the balance right, there's no one answer for every organization, and getting that balance right is really important. All right. The things that we think are really important are from a device and network protection requirements. Physically protect your device, lock it when ensure your staff know how to lock it when it's left unattended. Don't install or use unauthorized software. Keep devices up to date. That's the one that organizations, because not only for personal computing devices, but also for network devices, is really important to make sure you've closed out those, as you saw, 25% of increase in vulnerabilities over the last 12 months. That's why patching is so important, and making sure you set those expectations appropriately on bring your own devices. So for instance, we generally recommend that they're PIN, passcode or fingerprint protected. So there's protection over the top of it. Don't store personal information about clients or members on those devices. Keep the devices and apps up to date, have antivirus on there. And that remote wipe capability being really important if a device is lost or stolen, so that you can be sure that if there's email or there's other information synced to that device or saved, it does get you do have that ability to control it and remove it. Network security, this is something that's changed a lot with COVID. In the old days, there was a network perimeter, and if you manage your network perimeter, then you were fine. These days, actually, both Anne and I are working from home today. We had an office day yesterday, but thinking through the fact that people now work in lots of different places, and you don't have those business firewalls protecting everyone, and making sure your security protections are up to scratch for that is really important. Ensuring staff understand how to deal with a security incident and a potential security incident is really important. It's really critical that staff feel that they can contact someone and talk through what's happened or what might have happened or something that they're concerned about, without fear of being told off or fear of there's an issue as a result of that. So this might be an IT support person as a contact point. It might be a privacy officer. It might be a security officer, but just making sure that they have that contact point and can talk through, I received this strange email. What should I do? Yes, I clicked on it. I'm sorry, I put my email and password in. I was on the phone at the same time. And working through that is really critical. The challenges we have is that ensuring staff understand and are aware of how to spot phishing emails, and we'll cover this in a slide or two as well, is critical from the perspective of this is still one of the biggest entry points that we see access into organizations coming through, because non-profit stuff and commercial organizations, they've got exactly the same issues, don't always have the time to read and think fully, and the hackers can be quite clever in the way they phrase their emails. So it's really important that staff do know how to spot a phishing email, how to use organizational email and the internet responsibly, and also ensuring that information is not sent via unauthorized messaging platforms. We still sort of see, I was working with an organization just the other day, struggling with, oh yes, well these staff are using Google Drive to share stuff with this. The official platform is, 365, but then there's also a Dropbox environment that this team's using, and just bringing that back into something that's more appropriate for sensitive data, and reducing, the use of some platforms is really important. We run free monthly webinars for non-profit staff that explain the phishing basics and how to keep information secure. So for instance, if you haven't, and I know you've all been to the Connecting Up site, but you can see, oh, there we go. There's our December Cybersecurity 101 webinar for non-profit staff. We've just decided to run these every month because it just gives you an easy way for staff to be educated on those cybersecurity basics. So we're now just saying we'll run it. It's a half-hour lunch and learn session once a month. December the 7th at 1 p.m. is the next one, so that you can ensure your staff know those basics and get that fundamental training. And if they, if they've joined and it's more important, you can't wait till the next one, there's also the old webinars available for free as a recording at no cost. So that was something we've just decided to start doing, just to help you educate your staff, because it was always, we got a lot of feedback that it was too much effort for non-profits to do it themselves. Entry points that we're seeing come in at the moment are phishing. So that was what we've just talked about. I'll cover a couple of examples next. Ransomware, this was a big deal a couple of years ago. It's still happening, but not to the same extent. We saw a few in the Australian media being reported sort of earlier this year and last year, where your data fundamentally gets encrypted and they ask for a payment to decrypt the data, to provide the decryption keys. The easiest way out of ransomware is generally just have a backup, and just restore from backup. If you've got backups, usually, assuming that there's not other entry points that they're still getting into, and you've closed however they got in down, that's usually the easiest way out of the ransomware approach. Business email compromise, email interception and business accounts to divert funds to illegitimate accounts. We do see that a lot at the moment. Stolen credentials, supply chain, so customers and supplier systems. We don't see that as often in the not-for-profit sector. That's more often in the commercial sector. Misconfiguration, covered that. One of the really bad stories in Victoria was due to user access not being revoked when someone left, and misdelivery of information was the last top security entry point. This is just a little example of something that came in a little while ago, which we felt was worth talking through. So this is a real life example. Staff received this email about a message could not be delivered. They then clicked on the review button because they're going, oh, that's a bit strange. Why has it not happened? Got what they thought was a standard SharePoint login page. They actually entered their email address and password. Fortunately, multi-factor authentication was employed, and that protected from that. But the staff member was still asked to change their password. There were a few trigger points in this one, which was this is where educating staff about what to look for and sending them to our free webinars is something that we would highly recommend you do if you haven't. Trigger points being the emailer address that it was sent to, The spelling in here, the fact that when you hovered over the link, it was an unusual link. So there was quite a few hints that this is not appropriate. So this is, just a little example of, this one got through. The email address and password was entered into the website. Even though it wasn't a real SharePoint website, there was lots of triggers that could have been picked up. They were protected by multi-factor authentication, but that was pretty frustrating. Here's another example: email to change bank account details received by payroll. That was signed off from a staff member, theoretically. Payroll responded saying, but then noticed that the from email address was different. And that was when the trigger received that, this is actually not legitimate. So this was another trigger, real life story that didn't get through, but it was because of vigilance. So this is where, it's both that business email compromise, it's making sure anyone that deals with money is also additionally aware. That's what's really important from our perspective. This is one of our, this is a slide that Hivent created, which we really like, and we use in our staff webinars. 7 ways to catch a fish. If they're aware of these, 95 times out of 100, they'll pick up the phishing attempts. Checking the from address, checking the reply address, looking for poor spelling, grammar, or design, being aware of attachments that weren't asked for, a generic greeting, dear taxpayer, dear sir, rather than dear Marcus, an urgent call to action, click now to submit your tax return, I need money transferred today so I can purchase something, and the other one, which is a great one, the hover over tip. So hover over the URLs just to check them and see where they're going. So they're the 7 ways that we try and educate staff to catch the fish. You want multi-factor authentication as well, because good fishers will still sometimes get through, but making sure that staff are aware of this and feel confident with this is really important to making sure that you've got those appropriate protections in place. Quick question: have you been affected by data theft or IT system compromise? So has you or your organisation been affected? Just interested in what people are reporting. It might be small, it might be large, and we're getting close to 50-50. So that's interesting. And this is why it's so important, because we've actually been, we've had someone approach us just last week, and it was the second time they've been affected. And so they're going, clearly we didn't really tackle it properly the first time. We thought we had the basics in place. So it's really important to think about what protections are in place. We're right on 50-50 now at the moment. So getting that's just a little demonstration that across the group that we're here today, 50% have been affected by either data theft or system compromise. All right. The same as it's important to educate staff and think about the human element. It's not just about IT systems and processes and protections. Some organizational processes require a security lens that are not technology focused. If you deal with money, usually we recommend for certain processes, make sure that there's a process which involves a conversation. So for instance, what we've got here, if you're in finance, verify change of bank account details via an alternate channel, e.g., use, if the request was made via email, use a phone call to verify that information. I've had an incident where I got an email from, they weren't a client, they were just someone that I've been corresponding with. It looked dodgy to me. I sent a response back going, this looks strange. I got an email back straight away going, no, it's not strange. It's absolutely legitimate. I picked up the phone, called the person, said, this is what I just got. They said, holy moly, that was someone. So the hacker was in their email responding to my strange queries at the time, and the hacker was busy deleting those emails from the inbox of the person, and it was only because I got on the phone and called them that they were aware of what was going on. So that second process of verifying those important financial details via phone and also via something publicly, and Sharon's just asked, are we able to borrow? Absolutely, yes you are. The information is really important. You know, making sure that you cover that, it's critical to protecting your organization's financial situation and dollars, and making sure you don't get caught up. We've recently released our digital technology in the not-for-profit sector survey. There's a link there in the slides, but if you Google it, you'll find it as well. It was released, I think, last week, so it's hot off the press. About 50% of organisations provide cybersecurity and privacy awareness training for their staff. That frustrates me to no end, only because we now make it available free every month. So, like, please send your staff to that if you're one of the 50% that aren't providing it. The reasons for not having information security policies, lack of budget or resources, just so you're aware, and it'll be in the links. We worked with PwC to produce an information security policy template, as well as an end user use of technology template, which you can just download and customize for your organization. So what we've been busy trying to do is make these things a whole lot easier for not-for-profits, rather than have to create everything from scratch. As you can see, 45% are yet to develop a data breach response plan. Once you've got the basics in place, that's some of the things that we always recommend you do. About 50% are yet to have a process to manage info security risks. A third, so very similar to the stats today, are yet to implement MFA, and about 50% have an InfoSec policy in place as well. We use this framework. There's also the ACSC Essential 8s framework. They do some really good work. For those that need to go the extra step, there's ISO and more sophisticated security accreditation. But what we generally say is every nonprofit should be aiming at least for the basic level of, and this is available on our website, on the digital transformation website, basic level of security. So MFA is configured on 365 and Google Workspace. Shared accounts are eliminated or minimized and effectively managed. Data backups have been considered and are configured as appropriate, right? So we're not saying have backup on everything, we're just saying think about it. Windows PCs have antivirus protection, etc. Many organizations will say we need to go that next step to the intermediate. Some organizations will go all the way to advanced, but we're still working with a lot of organizations getting these basic protections in place to make sure they've got those fundamentals. From a roadmap perspective, this is generally what we recommend. Get those basics, MFA, making sure things are being patched, user education, data backups, our spam filtering, antivirus firewalls, user accounts. None of that's overly complex or difficult. Doesn't take a lot of time. Then begin the governance journey. Communicate the end user security policy, engage the management team, because there is a big human and cultural element to cybersecurity. Think about what sort of information your organization collects. Define where it needs to be stored. This doesn't need to be complex or rocket science. A lot of organizations, they've done it on a single slide. This is client data. Make sure it's in your client management system. This is the next category of data. Make sure it's only stored in these spots. Don't store it to PCs, that sort of thing. Then it's getting that next level of intermediate protections in place, improving your patch and your asset management, your password practices, user access rights, and continuing on down that journey. This is, every organization needs to work out what's a priority for them, but this is a starting base that many organizations find useful to focus on the basics first. Couple of key takeaways. Great to see many organizations already have it in place. Those that don't, please get multi-factor authentication in place for your core systems. Please use strong and educate your staff to use strong passwords or passphrases that are unique. Show them the have I been pawned website to explain why that's so important. Educate your staff, send them to our webinars if you're not doing something yourself for your organization. Ensure that they don't respond to emails requesting personal financial information or passwords. As we've sort of said here, fraudsters can create websites that look exactly like a real supplier or a real bank or a real system. Don't log into that website that you've reached through a link in an email unless you're very, very confident that you understand what you're doing. The OCSC has their Essential 8, which is always a good resource to think through things, and remember that there's a human and a cultural element to cybersecurity. So engage your management team to make sure that they are having the conversation on, are we doing enough to keep things safe? A bunch of useful resources. I've put the hub up there, so we've tried to put what we find is, so I'll just go back to the right one. Here we are, cybersecurity resources on the Digital Transformation Hub. As always, everything on the hub is free. So a bit of a summary on current threat landscape, what it is and why it matters. Here's the cybersecurity essentials, where to begin. And then if you go beyond those, the training, which includes links to what I just talked about, and then through the intermediate level on a template policy, also best practice governance, a do-it-yourself end-user security policy. So again, what we've tried to do is create templates for you to pick up and customize and use as is appropriate, delete, modify, whatever's appropriate for your organization. 5 No's, I won't go through all the rest. The ID Care is another great organisation that gives good advice if someone has been affected by identity theft, because that's a really tough one. I'm going to open up to questions. We really want to make this as valuable as possible. Please raise your hand, a virtual hand in Teams, or please make sure that you just come off mute and ask. We're really keen to answer your questions. Anne has kindly put a link to a feedback form. We would love your feedback on this cybersecurity webinar. How can we make it more useful for you? And Sharon, as I said, absolutely, please feel free to use that fish slide to send out to staff, or send them to our staff training webinar, because that's the other one that we actually talk about. That slide, the slide was created by Hivent, so that they're a great cybersecurity organisation that do really good work in this space. So please let us know either in chat or raise your hand if you have any questions. I'll give you a minute or so, and if there's no questions, I will answer a couple that I often get asked. It's like I might have covered everything. Oh, Kate's. Recommendations for securing company-provided Android devices. Currently no antivirus on them. Oh, no problem, Stacey. So when we think about both Android and iOS devices, generally we would, and first of all, it depends what data is on them. but we do recommend having a mobile device manager of some sort that ensures that you can secure and remote wipe effectively. No problems, Magdalena and Jenny. First comment is it depends. If you're in the Microsoft 365 environment and get non-profit pricing, we generally recommend Intune as a good solution for that. Every Android device is slightly different. Unfortunately, you know, a Samsung is handled very slightly differently to an Otto device, is handled, you know, very slightly differently to the next Android device. But we do recommend, if you're in that 365 environment, that Microsoft Intune is a cost-effective solution of doing mobile device management that then forces the Android device to have encryption enabled, something that's actually quite useful and not on by default, which is a bit frustrating, or not always on by default, and also can be remotely wiped if the thing is lost. You know, there is also the ability to enroll it in I'm going to get the name slightly wrong here, in the Google Business program that gives you some of those features, but the mobile device management through the Microsoft, you know, Intune, etc., gives you an added level of control and remote wipe capability. So that's what I would suggest in terms of recommending to remotely or to secure company provided Android devices. Hopefully that answers your question, Kate. No problems. As I said, if you're on the 365 nonprofit program, it's part of the business premium license, which we find is usually the most cost effective to provide security protections. Jenny, yes, that's one of the biggest challenges. Jenny's just said it's mind-blowing as to who in our organisation should or could be managing all of this. That's one of the biggest challenges, and that's why we also say start with the basics. Oh, thanks, Kieran, sharing an Intune link from Microsoft's Learn site, so or mobile device management. And Intune can actually also be used to manage business owned, sorry, that's the wrong word, can also be used to create a secure container within personally owned devices as well. So we've got quite a few organizations we've been working with who allow email to be, you know, allow personal devices to be used, particularly mobile phones, and sometimes have sensitive data in email. And so they will also use Intune to create a secure container for the email. And if the device is lost or when the person leaves the organization, they can then remote wipe that container so that there's no risk of that data being lost, even though, you know, it's a personal mobile phone and they've got no ability to remote wipe the whole thing, which is what individuals often have a challenge with. I don't want to give you control over my phone because it's my phone. Thank you very much. Beautiful. If there's no other questions, we will finish up a little bit early. As always, don't hesitate to ask if there's something. Both Anne and I can always be contacted through the Ask an Expert form on the Digital Transformation website. If you haven't already, please give us feedback on the webinar so that we can finesse and improve it in future sessions to date. Thanks so much for your time. Best of luck in your cybersecurity journeys and balancing that challenge of, you know, keeping things secure, but making sure things are functionable and usable, and also not spending too much, spending only an appropriate amount of time on cybersecurity protections rather than every waking hour of every waking day. So thanks so much. Stay safe in Cyberland, everyone.